Hello to everyone from New York. It's wonderful to be working together at this time when the outpouring energies of the Gemini full moon are with us. And surely as a result of the collective work that we've carried forward, those of us who work within the heart center of the new group of world servers during this festival period has enabled us as a group to help strengthen the bridge between the inner and outer worlds. And this bridging work, as we all know, is so needed as a counterbalance to the many forces that are seeking to separate us. And together we can stand in support of all those who are cooperating with the forces of light. During the Gemini full moon, the energy, as we know, of the second ray of love wisdom is pouring out, emanating from points within the heavens. And it's said that it can lead to a healing of the nations. And so we have to hold that in our minds and hearts and know that beneath all that is occurring in the outer world, that the impulse of love is flowing strong. I'm grateful for the opportunity to participate in this session on spiraling, for it is through spiraling, under the impulse of soul purpose, that the needed love can be generated. For we live and move in a second ray solar system. And so it's this quality of love that underlies all the happenings of the times. And to illustrate this concept of spiraling upward on the path of return, I'd like to share a Tibetan Buddhist painting that's called The Path of Calm. It's said that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and it seems to be so in this instance, for the painting offers a powerful visual of the spiral path that we're all treading. In the picture, we can see the different stages of that path symbolized by the relationship between the man, who represents the thinker, the elephant, representative of the mind itself, and the monkey, who represents the distractions that so often plague that mind. We see all three journeying along an ascending mountain path, and at each stage, the three gradually change their positions and their colors as a consequence of the growing mental control of the thinker. At the beginning of their journey, the monkey mind controls, and we see him leading, leaving the elephant and the man scurrying behind. But as the journey continues up the mountain, the thinker becomes more and more able to take charge through the growing ability to control the mind or the elephant. And then by the end of the path, we see that the monkey, the distractions, has disappeared altogether. And we see the thinker now perched atop the elephant in complete control of his instrument. And as a consequence of that attainment of mental control, we see that the mountain path has turned into a rainbow bridge. And then in the distance, we can glimpse the white city lying far ahead, the center Shambhala. And at this point in the journey, the seeker reverses himself upon his path and descends into the field of service, illumined, one-pointed, turning his back upon the light supernal. Spiraling, as we know, takes place over the course of many, many lives, each life bringing its lessons, its opportunities and crises, and each leading to subsequent points of tension, which in turn become points of polarization, which serve as the means whereby the soul, and later the triadal energies, can be drawn out, impressing the personality, molding and strengthening, generating heat, and a consequent energetic moving out through the growing ability to harness the spiritual will. And as the first of the rules of the road states, the transitions which we pass through on each turn in the spiral force us to face ourselves, which can be a rather humbling experience. These periods of facing ourselves are the crisis points, the bends and twists in the road, wherein the challenge is not only to confront the dweller aspect of ourselves, but also the real, which is described by the Tibetan as a terrifying experience. If we consider these bends in the roads as the decades of our lives, we come to see that as we approach each one, the way becomes steeper, the air thinner, and the body more fragile. From the perspective of the soul, there are said to be two major crises or turning points in the long trajectory that is our lives. The first crisis is related to the service opportunities and the life direction that's being offered by the soul, but which can only often run contrary to the demands and wishes of the personality. So will we see this opportunity for what it is? This crisis generally emerges between the ages of 35 to 42. The second opportunity is the crisis of expression, which comes in the later years and which tests the disciple's ability to manifest and express his or her strongly held ideals. A test which is often bitter, we're told, and which involves considerable adaptation of an oft-times crystallizing consciousness. This second test would appear to come somewhere between the ages of 58 to 63. This choice, posed by the soul of those passing through it, can be encapsulated in a question posed by the Tibetan to his group. Speaking of the disciple, he says, "Shall he rest back on his laurels? And will the strong undertow of ordinary human frailty pull him back from renewed effort? Or shall he be carried forward much farther upon the path of life expression?" The act of spiraling brings to mind the influence of Capricorn, which is being strongly highlighted in our conference work, but also at this juncture in human history, unveiling, on the one hand, because of the duality of Capricorn, the depths of human separation, selfishness, and materialism, while on the higher manifestation of that same energy, Capricorn brings the gifts of an extended vision under an initiatory impress. Perhaps, as many have said, the situation and the pause created by this present pandemic have permitted the group to tune in to the vision, to that which is seeking expression and entry into our planetary life. If we step back from the forefront of the current situation, if we study the rhythms and cycles of life, we will find perhaps that everything does move in perfect harmony, although perhaps not at the speed that we would like. For there is a grand design called by the ageless wisdom the plan. And within this plan, all things are known, all things are in order, and all things are tending towards greater beauty. And as we begin to see through the eye of the soul, light pours in, and we're permitted to glimpse within these wider and vaster holes. There are astrological cycles, ray cycles, and cycles within cycles. The old commentary posits that there is one great wheel, and that as it turns, all the many spheres and suns of all degrees follow its course. It's said that the night of time is lost in it, in this wheel, and that kalpas measure less than seconds in the little day of man. The verse goes on to say that 10 million kalpas pass, and twice 10 million Brahmic cycles, and yet 1 hour of cosmic time is not completed. Through such cosmic ponderings, we come to sense the reality of the plan as held within the consciousness of those who have transcended time as we know it, and who instead live in the eternal. This spiral cyclic motion of the path, whether in our individual lives or within the vast spirals of the cosmos itself, are irrevocably carrying us all forward. Society today places a premium upon speed, whereas the rishis of old viewed life quite differently. But things change, and the speed of contemporary life holds within it the possibility of rapid progress for those who live and work within the jungles of the West. But to realize this opportunity, we're called to heal the cleavages in our world, to rectify the imbalances, the injustice, and to cultivate a point of peace within the center of the surrounding storm. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? I'm just going to assume you can. Okay, so.
Yes.
So when reflecting upon the symbol of the spiral, I was reminded that that evolution is cyclic in nature, and that the path of discipleship reflects the nonlinearity of the spiral. On this path, if one is truly living a life focused at a point of spiritual tension, discipleship is a continual series of failures and triumphs. Alice Bailey, a disciple who lived her life focused at a point of supreme spiritual tension, reminds us that, quote, every failure, every success are all opportunities to serve, to reveal God, and to demonstrate the divine potentiality of the human being. For many, there is sometimes a sense of futility or inadequacy as they approach the beginnings of the discipleship path. And this futility and inadequacy can hinder their work, and it prevents forward motion upon this spiraling journey. The path of discipleship asks us to live up to very high ideals, and the inability to rise to this idealism can lead to inaction, to cynicism, or even just to an emotional depression. For many who seek to tread this path, this sense of futility is exacerbated by a deepening sense of world need and by a growing desire and sense of responsibility to respond, to aid, and to help. On this path, one's vision of divine potentiality often develops faster than one's outer capacities to manifest this potentiality and to address world need. We are then left with a sense of being ill-equipped to contribute meaningfully to the task which confronts us. This sense of futility can lead to a hesitancy to act and to engage in new, creative, and risky projects, rather than an eagerness to dive headfirst into the adventures of spiritual living and service. There's a fear of wrong action and a lack of faith that one can measure up to the task which the soul has bestowed upon its reflection. On the other end of the spectrum, of course, the inpouring energy of the soul stimulates a flurry of activity on concrete levels. But unless that action is directed by the soul with recollectedness and poise, the forms created will be spiritually empty. The ageless wisdom reminds us that humanity's largest problems are not solved by individuals, but by groups. And the keynote of Aquarian Age discipleship, as we know, is group work, group consciousness, and group initiation. And this group coordination and cohesion, as we know, occurs in the realm of consciousness. And group work, therefore, is powerful because it has creative effects in both the subtle and concrete realms simultaneously. Despite the necessity of the group, a lack of faith and conviction in one's individual capacity fundamentally indicates a wrong relationship between the self, the solar angel, and the world of experiment, experience, and expression. As disciples, our faith comes from a sense of knowing, which is only possible once the soul has been contacted in meditation. Our ability to contact the soul, at least in small measure, becomes a beacon of light which guides us upward along the spiraling path of discipleship. The spiral, as I said, is a symbol of the process of evolution, and thus also represents the passing of time. The spiral reminds us that though the requirements of the discipleship path remain relatively the same, our own and humanity's place upon the spiral does progress. World need is much different than it was 100 years ago, for example. And as disciples, we are asked always to respond to world need and to adapt ourselves to what the manifesting plan requires of us. As disciples, though, we are not asked simply to respond to the current crises of humanity, rather to uphold the vision of the future and to work intelligently with the power of thought to see the future materialized. Disciples must become intelligent agents of spiritual manifestation, and this requires us to evoke the powers of the soul and to reveal the truth hidden in all forms. To this end, we are asked first to assume the attitude of the observer, and only once we stabilize our consciousness above the fray can we serve powerfully. But then the effects of our creative work will have their origins in the realm of spiritual causes. Discipleship responsibility, though, extends beyond just observation. It requires us to build and create as well, even if it is just to share the perspective, free from illusion, which we have achieved. The creative work of the disciple involves mediating truth into human expression, clothing it in some form. We can imagine the disciple paving humanity's way upon the cyclic spiral of evolution, weaving humanity's path out of the substance of one's own spiritually aligned consciousness. And this creative work, this weaving, requires, amongst other things, the right use of conviction, which is the correct alignment and direction of the lower and higher wills. Right conviction aligns the lower and higher will in such a way that they become mutually affirming. The presence of the higher will affirms humanity as an agent of divinity, while the lower will, when aligned, affirms this divinity as an expressed fact. When the aligned will is concentrated upon the lower mental plane, it creates a reservoir of energy that reflects both the will to serve and the will to good. This reservoir of focalized energy is the disciple's consecrated spiritual intention. It gives both strength and direction to the disciple as they tread the path, living simultaneously in the realm of consciousness and the realm of human living. In conclusion, we can say that the right use of this will upon the discipleship path enables us to act without fear, without hesitation, and without undue self-reflection. When rightly aligned, we are no longer lost in a sense of futility, nor are we naively compelled to act simply for the sake of action. Right alignment makes the will of the disciple indomitable and unswerving in the attainment of their spiritual goal. In the words of Alice Bailey, she says, quote, "It is the going on when the point of exhaustion has been reached, the taking of another step when the strength to do so seems gone, the holding steady when there seems nothing but defeat ahead, and the determination to endure whatever may be coming when endurance has been taxed to the limit, which is the hallmark of disciples of every degree." Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy and Michael. Kathy, you touched on many essential issues: the true nature of love, the time factor in the art of spiraling, the spiral cyclic motion of the path, which involves that long haul of true spiritual work. And yet equally, both you and Michael mentioned rightly that this is a time of opportunity too for more rapid progress if we avail ourselves of this time of opportunity. And you also mentioned the relationship to crisis. And Michael, I just found it interesting that in this process of trial and error, you touched on the sense of futility, because it is very real for many people.
Yeah.
When the consciousness spirals forward, we sort of struggle to manifest the grand vision of the soul, and we just feel inadequate to address the need around us as fully as we would like. Do you agree that we see this in our students at times? And do you think also perhaps that it could be the very depth of the teachings that we have that contribute to this? With it, they have such a grand vision of the present and the future that that sense of futility can be awakened temporarily.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very normal and very human to have this sort of sense of futility. But I think particularly on the discipleship path, there's a sense of, increased responsibility and increased vision, but yet you don't really have that vision yet, especially at the beginnings of the discipleship path, and really all along it, you're oscillating between maybe having some sort of revelation or recognition of something, but yet you don't really see the whole picture, or you don't really see it clearly enough to express it, and it's so difficult because it's just painful, really. And I think and definitely I see it in a lot of the students in the school. I work on the lower desk in New York, and it is really, I mean, the teachings are really a blessing in so many ways because they've been given to us by hierarchy, and it's things that humanity on its own would never have discovered at this point. We wouldn't have spiritual teachings like this at all if it weren't for hierarchy. But what that means, though, is that there's sort of a gap still. There's a gap between where we as humanity are and between the revelation that has been provided to us. And so that gap is sort of just like a gap of darkness. And, when we try to bridge that gap, it's so easy just to get lost in the darkness. But we have to have, a faith that is based not just in belief, but in knowing.
Sure. And we think of, I think you mentioned that the spiral is a symbol of the process of evolution and represents the passing of time. And that's something, Kathy, you also mentioned. And obviously it's all about time, the rotary motion of the lower vehicles. But when we start to touch the soul, a spiral develops as the two interact. And we know that spiraling is the action of the second, or the Vishnu aspect, and it has a correspondence to the law of group progress.
Yes. Yeah, I had an opportunity at one point in my life to go to Nepal and to go hiking in the foothills of the Himalayas. And I can only attest that it really was the group. I was with a group of actually people on the spiritual path. And it was amazing how the group was able to pull me, at least, much further and much more, not easily, it wasn't easy, but the group kept you going because you knew that if you stopped, you would delay the entire group from moving forward. And even though you thought you couldn't take another step, just the group pulled you along. So I think it's a real apt parallel to our progress on the spiritual path, especially if we're participating in something like the arcane school training, wherein even though sometimes we might not feel connected if we're in a very distant place and somewhat isolated, if we extend our consciousness to the recognition that we are indeed working subjectively as part of a group, that it can serve to aid us in those difficult bends and twists on the path when we feel we can't go on. The group can serve to pull us along.
Yeah, and that sort of brings us back to the will, really, which is something Michael touched on, which is so essential to sustain the spiral of consciousness, to keep the focus on the spiritual intention. But at the same time, we're told to learn self-forgetfulness. And this is one of the apparent paradoxes on the path, I think, one of many that we have to work our way through. I think the evening review is a help, don't you, in this process?
What was that? I didn't hear what you said.
The evening review.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because in our futility, if we focus on that all the time, or if we just keep looking at ourselves, we're self-referencing all the time, rather than spiraling towards that vision and activating the spiritual will to continue. I mean, it's a natural thing to do, but that is why the practice of the evening review is so important, to have that time when you legitimately look at the energies you use throughout the day, you look back and see the quality of your life.
Especially that some of the references the Tibetan gives about the spiritual diary related to the review, and how we can look for certain things in our lives as indicators of the soul working through the personality, such as observing more the beauty in life, the beauty in other people, service, means whereby you recognize other people serving, as well as your own inner experiences of what you might perceive to be soul contact. These are helpful points for me to try and take the review from a sort of amorphous activity into looking for specific things that manifest in your life.
Absolutely.
I think also one thing that really is a saving grace in this work is that we do have sort of a more acute sense of world need, I think. Not necessarily, well, yes, acute, but also just a deeper sense of what the need really is from the standpoint of spirituality. But I think that need also is a way of decentralization, because if you really keep world need in the front of your consciousness, it's like your own problems aren't really so problematic anymore, you know. And if there is some sense of darkness or unknowing, well, you know, who doesn't really matter, you know, so much. Okay, well, I don't know so much. I don't know, but here's where need is, and here's how I can help. And that's just, that in of itself is such an uplifting thing. I think anybody who's ever taught probably has that experience. I taught dance for a short time, just several years, and when you get in those environments where you're surrounded by students who need your teaching, you almost become a different person. You know, you don't think of yourself, and you don't really think of anything else. It's just, yeah.
The project before you.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
And I suppose the spiral gives us the opportunity. It provides a lot of opportunity because it loops back in order to allow us to assimilate lessons and to think about what we must learn. I mean, it does bring futility sometimes, because you think you have mastered something and you've moved on, but somehow it comes back on a much subtler level for us to look at again and examine.
And to let go of.
Yes. I actually found a very interesting comment in esoteric psychology, and it's connected with this law of repulse and attraction. And it states, from the angle of hierarchy, the story of the aspirant is the story of his response to or repulse of applied energies. And so it sort of brings us back to this, the ray of intelligent love, which is characterized by this symbol of the spiral of consciousness. It's the goal of our system. And as part of that, there's the cosmic law of attraction and repulsion, which is the basic law of this divine ray of love wisdom. And I think that's it's something that grows, you feel more comfortable with as you move through the training process, that you have to, it's a letting go, but there's almost a repulsion of certain aspects of thinking or even of action that continues on that path.
I noticed in Kathy's picture that she brought up, there was also fire along the path.
Oh yeah,
Some people may think of that as a hazard or something, but really it's just the purificatory fires, and the meditations we do are mental and thus fiery in nature. And once you've been in the school for a while, I mean, you've been on a daily basis dealing with these purificatory fires, and so they start to have effects that perhaps you don't even recognize or weren't even totally intentional, in terms of, like you said, kind of repulsing off these sort of ways of thinking that just aren't of a higher order or whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting with the way of fire mantra. We use it very cautiously in the school, and the Tibetan says, don't use this unless you want to bring the fires into your life. And I think anybody who has used it has, with depth of meaning, has brought those fires into their lives. And I've known some people who had to stop using it because of its potency.
Because they hadn't prepared sufficiently. And we are playing with fire and meditation, aren't we? And that is brought home to us from time to time.
Yeah, especially at this time in planetary history, when the planetary fires are alive, and when they're coupled with our own individual fires, people, as you say, do have to take care. Otherwise, you can unleash forces within your subtle vehicles that are very difficult to quell. And I think that's why there's preparation needed. We don't just automatically take anybody into the school, because there's a certain amount of preparatory training needed before you even step into that school. So
yes,
the school then further unleashes additional fire. So it's a progressive application as we turn each road, each spiral in the path as we move up. It gets more difficult. And I think that's sometimes what people don't understand. They enter into a spiritual training expecting that their lives will immediately, all their problems will go away and be dealt with. But in fact, it's often the reverse, and hidden factors, as the path reveals more of those hidden factors of ourselves. We find new challenges confronting us. But eventually, there is release at the same time. As you say, it's dual. It's a dual path.
It's a bit like what somebody said in a meeting earlier today, that really what everything is about is becoming a generation of inquirers, that you're not here to get answers, but to keep deepening and keep questioning and keep opening up to new energies and forces.
Mm,
in service to humanity.
mm.
Well, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to close this session. I mean, we could talk about this subject for ages. And thank you both for such relevant and illuminating talks.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you,
Chris.
Becky and Michael.